This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, Kate Floss, citizen journalist, citizen lawyer, citizen fighter for the 1688 glorious revolution and the Bill of Rights, where all of the religions joined together and agreed upon a certain set of rights that would be given to us, all of us, under Almighty God. That was the first right. It's agreed that the first right that ever came to mankind was man's right under the natural law. And what had happened is that all the religions, the religions started to spring up. They started demanding that their right was higher than other people's rights. They started saying that they would have special laws only for their people, and anybody that wasn't born to those laws were not going to be protected under Almighty God. And in 1688, the Glorious Revolution occurred, and they had all gotten together after millions and millions of people had been killed. They all got together and they set out a certain set of rights which would belong to all mankind. Now, those rights came about in 1688 and have protected us for hundreds of years. The United Nations, SOS, Scotland, England, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America's out. They threw all of those rights out after 1688. Those people that didn't want those rights and didn't want those restrictions on the religions went to America. There's a lot going on there. But today I want to talk to you about the Declaration of Abroth from Scotland. And the important thing is to know how that came to be. Now, the Declaration of Abroth came about at almost exactly, well, around about the same time that the New Zealand Maori, and a short time later, the New Zealand Maori created the so-called Declaration of Independence. Now, both of these declarations came to be under the Catholic Church and under the Catholic governance, who were fighting against the kings and the Protestants for all power. There's this huge war that's been going on, and all of us are caught up in it, and we're all constantly trying to get out of it, and we're all constantly being dragged into it. And the only thing that saved us was the 1688 Glorious Revolution and the will of Mary. That was, I call it the will of Jesus. Jesus came back and gave us a will that we could all live by. And it's these nefarious forces, these devilish forces that are trying to get it out. Now, I want to share a little bit of where all this began. So I'll go to the window and I want to share with you the first people that came about here was a man called Martin Luther. Now, Martin Luther, I shouldn't have moved that. Martin Luther in 1516, hang on. In 1516, hang on. Martin Luther wrote to the Bishop of Albrecht von Brandenburg protesting against the sale of indulgences. Now, the sale of indulgences was that they said to the people, you've committed a sin, and they made up all this list of things that were going to be the sins, and they said in order for you to get out of that sin, you would have to pay this indulgence. And the debt became higher and higher and higher, and even the leaders in the churches weren't able to pay the indulgences. So they were telling the people to pay the indulgence, which is similar to taxes today. It was a remission of the temporal punishment of sin, half of the proceeds which Albert was to claim to pay the fees of his benefices. Now, you can go and research Martin Luther all you like, but it's important not to get caught up in this, because this is the ancient history, but it's just showing you about why we're in our state of affairs that we're in today and all this problem. Now, England is presently governed by a Hindu, Indonesian national who is a devout Hindu or one of those religions, and in an actual fact by a Protestant law, none of the other religions are permitted to govern over England, Scotland, Ireland, New Zealand, or Australia, or Canada. I'm not sure about Canada, but I know New Zealand and Australia. Now, what I want to tell you is that all the people that were sent on ships to those countries all came out of the wars of Germany, Scotland, Ireland, and England. All of those were put on ships and sent out to New Zealand and Australia to protect those countries against these evildoers that were forcing the indulgences on the people and forcing all these laws on the people. Now, what had happened was Martin Luther, not the Martin Luther King of America, but the true original Martin Luther, who was German. Now, he wrote a letter, and in his disputation on the power and efficacy of the indulgences, they were charging too much money, the people couldn't pay, and they were enforcing on them cruel and unusual punishments, such as cutting out their tongues, cutting off their heads, hanging them, boiling them alive, cutting off their fingers, all of these things if they couldn't pay. If they could pay, they weren't subjected to the cruel and unusual punishments. Now, he came up with a thing known as the 95 Theses. The 95 Theses, and at one stage, they say that according to one account that he nailed the 95 Theses onto the doors of the Catholic Church, and he said that we want to govern ourselves. You no longer are permitted to govern over us, and we will have our own laws. These were the Germanic people they were the original tribes, the original indigenous tribes were the Germanic tribes, and all Scotland, English, Irish languages, laws, kings, everything comes out of Germany. So it's not good Germany's called the fatherland and England was called the motherland. And then all of the people that were put on the ships sent to New Zealand and Australia, they were all called the children of the fatherland and of the motherland. And if you're criticizing the fatherland, you're trying to bring down the fatherland, what you're doing is killing your own selves. So it's about time we all stood up for Germany and what they did for us. Now, Germany, the 95 Theses were nailed on the doors, and that was in 1517, and those that 95 Theses was translated into many other languages, into French, English, and Italy. All their languages come from the Germanic languages, so it all starts in Germany. All right, and here's the Catholic sale of indulgences in a question to the mint maker. So they were the elders. I won't talk about that too much. So out of that came the 30 Years' War. Now, this 30 Years' War was a conflict between the Protestants, which were from Germany and from Martin Luther, and the Catholics that were from the Holy Roman Empire. Now, the Protestants had their own Germanic laws from the ancient Germanic tribes, and the Holy Catholic Empire had created, there was a Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, and there are many things involved here. Now, if you want to look over here, we had the Peace of Prague, we had the Anti-Imperial Alliance from 1635, which was the Kingdom of Bohemia, Sweden, Palatinate, Savoy, Transylvania, Dutch, Denmark, Saxony, Prussia, all of these. And then we had the Imperial Alliance that wanted to have an imperial king, Habsburg, Spanish Empire, Bavaria, and the Catholic League. Now, it's no point trying to understand all of this stuff. It's just impossible. They had the commanders and they had the leaders, and all of us, the commoner people, were all caught up in this. We were just the commoner people, and what these religions were fighting over was land. When anybody was born to their religion, they signed a document that said that their child was a part of that religion, and all that child's lands were owned by that church or that religion. So they were fighting and fighting over these lands. Now, thousands of people in this 30 years war, they were stringing the Protestant people up. These were all Protestant people being hung up on the trees. They were invading the German towns, stringing up the Protestants, and Protestants were all called non-Christians. They were the nons. Now, over in New Zealand at the moment, they're trying to call us non-Maori, non-Indigenous, non-Pacifica. So it's just the whole war has started up again, and we're all being called the nons again, and we're not too far off from having our heads decapitated, being strung up in the village square, being boiled alive, and we're not that far off from it. Presently, they're locking us in houses, injecting people with nefarious substances. Now, this 30 years war, this is just recently, this was one of the mass graves. There were 47 bodies found in a mass grave from the Battle of Lutzen, one of the turning points in the devastating conflict. And this was found by archaeologists in 2006 in Germany, found what they believe was the site of the Battle of Lutzen, one of the turning points in the devastating 30 years war. Excavations of the site later identified a mass grave. It's thought that the 30 years war from 1618, these dates are important, from 1618 to 1648, the deadly clashes ravaged Europe. 20% of the total population of Germany died during the conflict, and there were losses of up to 50% in the corridor between Pomerania and the Black Forest. Now, these people, they traveled over to, these people traveled over into Scotland, Ireland, and England, and they were called the Anglo-Saxons, all right? So then that was the still the European wars. They were called the religious wars. And if you look on this one here, this is talking about the European wars of religion, and these all continued through the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. There was the Knights' Revolt in 1522, the German Peasants' War, 1524 to 1525 in the Holy Roman Empire, and the war was against the Catholics, against the Protestants who didn't want to be under their church doctrines. And from all of that, in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia was signed, and there came to be the Westphalian sovereignty. Westphalian sovereignty came about in around about 1648. It was the principle in international law that each state has exclusive sovereignty over its territory. The principle underlies the modern international system of sovereign states and is enshrined in the United Nations Charter. But I wouldn't trust that, because what the United Nations Charter has done, the United Nations has collected up all of these laws from all of the ancient countries. They've combined them all together, and then they've created their own new Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And what they've done is they've overshadowed all of those laws, and they've brought back the Jacobite laws. Now, all of these laws originally came from the Germanic law, and they were called the Anglo-Saxon laws, or the Old English laws of the Anglo-Saxons. And there's some controversy because the Germans were saying that these laws came from the ancient German peoples, but in actual fact, the Catholics are also saying that it came from the Catholic law. So there's a bit of a battle over there where these Anglo-Saxon German laws came from. So that's where all this starts from Martin Luther to the European religious wars, which is the 30 years wars, and the mass graves, and they all spilled over. All of that war that was going on there all spilled over. So you'll see that all of this occurred in here between the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, France, Castile, Portugal, Aragon. All of these wars were over here. I don't know where Germany is, but I think a lot of this was all originally owned by Germany. I'm not sure, but there's quite a lot of fighting going on there. Okay, so I'll put that one down. I'll stop that share. So what had happened was all of the Protestants that were being killed in those wars. Who are the Protestants? All the people that didn't want to be under the church doctrines, under the church laws, and they were accused of heresy, and they were burned alive, they were hanged, and they were German people, really. All the non-Christians, all the people that wanted nothing to do with any of the religions, they only wanted to function under the natural law, under directly to Almighty God. Now, all that spilled over into Scotland, Ireland, and England, all right? What we're going to go into today is Scotland. Now, there's no way that we're going to be able to figure out who all these kings are and who all the chiefs are of New Zealand. Now, this war spilled out over into New Zealand, and what we've got to do if we want to stop ourselves being put under the United Nations and be ruled by Indonesians and Islamists like Rishi Sunak, and like the Latter-day Saint Church, who is governing New Zealand and Australia and Canada, if we don't want, and Utah, if we don't want to be ruled by these kinds of religious rulers and these religious laws, then we're all going to have to join together, just like we did in the 1600s, when Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England all joined up together to fight against the religions that were coming into their country. So then this all started with, I'll just find it for you. So this all started, I'll turn that one off because I won't need Martin Luther King. So this all started, I'll go to share screen now. Now I'm not going to go, why am I doing this video is because the reason why I'm doing this video is because I'm trying to connect up England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, New Zealand, and Australia, and a little bit of Canada, but I'm not sure where they are, but they're not involved with all of these declarations, but they're in there somewhere. But let's just leave it at those 5 countries. And just remember that all the people, the thousands of people that were sent on the ships to New Zealand and Australia, all were the Protestant, they all came from the spell out of the Protestant German refugees who were all sent, 50% of them were sent to England, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. Now, the Irish called them German ladies, and they didn't want to be ruled by them, all right? And then there was another one in Scotland, and he was called Robert the Bruce. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the history. You can go and research Robert the Bruce first, but he was a believer in divine kings, just like the Catholics were believed in their divine rule, divine kings by birth and not by being, could never be removed. The king was born to another king, and if you didn't like him, if he treated you badly, then that was just too bad. You were stuck with him until he died and another king. So they usually ended up killing the kings is what ended up happening, and they just chopped their heads off. So this is Robert the Bruce. Now, Robert the Bruce was known as Robert the Bruce, and he was the king of the Scots from 1306 until 1329. Now, the New Zealand Maori can only be traced back to the year of around about the year 1300, at a very tight push was the year 1200. Now, they just arrived in New Zealand around about the year 1200. Well, that's around about the same time when all of these wars were going on over in Europe and England and Scotland and Ireland, and somebody just scooped up these New Zealand Maori from somewhere and sent them over to New Zealand. And so that they're just there to just leave them sit there for a minute while we come over to Robert the Bruce. Now, Robert the Bruce was, he was excommunicated by Pope Clement. So the fact that he was excommunicated says that he was a devout Catholic, and he was appointed by the Pope to be a king. At that point, all kings were appointed by the Pope, and he was appointed by the king, by the Pope, to be the king, and he had killed a man called John Comyn. John Comyn. Now, John Comyn, if you look over here, before I go into John Comyn, Robert the Bruce was called a Jacobite king. And a Jacobite king were kings that were believed in the divine right of king. And he believed that it was by his birth and nobody could get him out by excommunicating him or by removing him. The only way that he can be removed was by his death, and then his son would take the power. That's what the battle was going on here. So it kind of was that the Catholics believed that they could appoint the kings and they could remove the kings by their decision. And a new breed of kings rose up, and they believed that they owned the kingsmanship by their birth, and they started to go against the appointment of kings and go by the birth of kings. And then neither the Catholics nor the kings believed that the people could rule themselves. And the Protestants started to rise up, and they said, we will rule ourselves, and we will appoint our king, and we will be able to remove our king by ourselves if we want to, and nothing to do with. So there's this whole big battle going on amongst the people. Now, he was reinstated by another pope when he submitted a thing called the Declaration of Abroth. He submitted the Declaration of Abroth to King John the 12th, and he was the head of the Catholic Church from 1316. So Robert the Bruce was thrown out in 1306 by the Pope, but then he was reinstated in 1316 and remained because the Catholics, in order to quell the Protestants, they needed kings, and they needed kings that were supportive of the Catholic Church. So they had to reinstate him. But he was thrown out because of John Comyn's murder. And John Comyn came from the Comyn family, and he was a supporter of King John over in England. Now, King John over in England was forced to sign the Magna Carta. He didn't want to sign it. They forced him to sign it. Now, the Magna Carta, people are raving on about the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta gave the popes and any one of their kings absolute power over all of the people forever and ever, and the absolute power over all of the lands forever and ever. And they allowed the barons to be able to be the rulers of the people. And if the people had a problem, the people could go to the barons, and then the barons would decide if it was worthy or not. Then the barons would take it to the king. The king would then decide if it was worthy enough to go to the Pope, and then the Pope would decide if it was worthy enough to go to God, and he would make a ruling under God. So the people had to go through barons, and then from the barons to the kings, and then from the kings to the popes, and then from the popes to God, to get their ruling from God that would trickle right down, back down to the people to get their grievances heard. Now, the Protestants rose up and they said, We don't want to go through anyone. We believe that we can have a parliament and that we can go directly to God, to the Supreme Court by ourselves, and that we can get a ruling under God, and that we ourselves can take that ruling to the parliament and we can order them to stand down. We can do it by ourselves. So we've got, the Protestants said, we've got a direct line to God. We don't have to go through your barons. We don't have to go through your popes, but we do go through the king. The king is under God. The king can be removed by us, or the king can be kept there by us if he's following our laws. And then we said that, so the king is just the shelf that God's laws sit on, because if God's law is in the heavenly realm, they needed to create a heaven on earth. And when they did that, they needed a shelf. They gave us the king as a shelf for Almighty Lord God's laws to sit on. But in the event that the king was repugnant to Almighty God's natural laws, then we as a people could go directly to God and even have that king removed. So that was all done in 1688. So the Commons family were supporters of King John, who wanted to have all of these things, and they were supportive of William Wallace, who was also Scottish. You'll have to go and research him. I don't want to go too much into it. So there was an outbreak of war between England and Scotland. Comyn, his father, and his cousin, John Comyn, Earl of Buchanan, crossed the border and attacked Carlisle, and they defended for King Edward by Robert Bruce, Earl of Carrick, the father of the future king. So you'd have to go and research these kings, but it's almost impossible if you don't come from Scotland or Ireland. But let's just remember that all of the people in Australia, Anglo people in Australia, Anglo people in New Zealand, and all New Zealand Maori who are all got Anglo bloodlines in them, we all are out of the lineages of Scotland, Ireland, and England, and then all of those people, all of them are out of Germany, and then all of those people out of Germany came from two sides, the Catholic side and from the Protestant side. So that's how all of that, you can go and research all of this, but boy, it's a huge read, and we're in so much trouble now, there's not time to go there. Now, the Robert the Bruce, all right, were called Jacobites, and I'm going to do Jacobites in the next video, so I'm not going to do it in this one, all right? But the Jacobites was a political movement that supported the restoration of the senior line of the House of Stuart to the British throne. The name derives from the first name of James II and James VII, which in Latin translates as Jacobus. So James was a Jacobite king, and when James went into exile after the Glorious Revolution, so the people rose up, they said, we don't want to go through your barons, we don't want to go through your kings, we don't want to go through your popes and your religions, we want to go directly to the natural law of God under the Glorious Revolution, because they said first in right, best in law. And then they all realized that the rights, the original rights, come from the natural law, and there aren't many of them. And so when he left, the Parliament of England argued that he had abandoned the English throne, and which they then offered to the Protestant daughter Mary and the husband William. Now, this wouldn't have been possible had the Jacobite kings continued to reign. Then the only way the Parliament would not have been allowed to appoint who they wanted to be the king and who they wanted to be the queen. The the Protestant daughter of Mary and William of Orange, they were only allowed to take the throne on the condition that they signed the 1688 will and Mary, which said that they would govern according to the laws of the natural law of God for the people, and that if they did not govern according to those laws, no cruel or unusual punishments, freedom of speech, no spending all our taxes on their wars, no making laws arbitrarily, no forfeiture of our lands and all of those things. If they didn't do that, then we, the people, we would be allowed to remove them. Under a Jacobite king, we would never be allowed to remove them. So the Scottish Convention held that the forfeited throne of Scotland by his actions was listed in their grievances, and they came under the 1689 will and Mary. So that's when they signed up to it as well, against the Jacobite kings. The principle of the revolution was created, the principle of a contract between monarch and people, which, if violated, meant that the monarch could be removed. The Jacobites argued that monarchs were appointed by God or by divine right, which means they had to be appointed by the Catholic Church, or the other way that they could get their monarchy was by the divine right of birth. But the English throne came to be given by Parliament to the Protestant daughters of Mary and William, as long as they allowed us to remove them if they became tyrannical towards the people. So that's the difference between the Jacobite king of Robert the Bruce, all right, and the monarchical king of the common family, or from the Glorious Revolution. That's the difference between the two of them. Now, those Jacobite kings have never given up the fight. So we're going to be talking about that in the next one. So Robert the Bruce was defeated in 1689, the Scottish stopped the divine right of kings, and they brought in kings that were voted in by the Parliament. Now, presently, let's see, Robert the Bruce was the Earl of Carrick from 1292 to 1313, and this title is now held by Charles, the Prince of Wales. So he holds the title as Earl of Carrick, and he is he's not really a Jacobite king, but he's descended of the will and Mary, is where he gets his descent from. But it's interesting here that you'll see here that it's in 1292 that Robert the Bruce was ruling until 1313, but he would have been around, his father before him would have ruled, and it's in around between the years of 1292 and the years of 1300 that a group of tribal people of all different tribes from we know not where sprung up in the islands of New Zealand. This is going to be really important in later times when we talk about the Declaration of Abroth and the so-called Declaration of Independence that was written by a Catholic and a missionary wrote the Declaration of Independence for the New Zealand Maori. He wrote it by his own hand and translated it into Maori. And the Declaration of Abroth, where the Pope gave Robert the Bruce back his kingsmanship to fight off the Protestants that had spilled over from all of the religious wars in Germany, who had risen up against the Catholic and the Jewish religion. They'd risen up against all religions, actually. So that's all what's going on. So I'm just going to sing you this little song here, and then that'll be the end of the video. But next time, when you come back to the next video, we're going to be talking about the Jacobites and how the Scottish and the Irish and the English got all the Jacobites out because they wanted to have a parliament. They didn't want to go through barons. They didn't want to go through kings. Why did the parliament keep a king there? They only kept a king there as a shelf to set our godly rights on. If our godly rights didn't have a shelf, then they would fall to the ground, and the shelf needed to be very high up. It had to be high, it had to have lineage, it had to have heritage, and it was born of the fatherland and the original laws of the Germanic tribes. In the Old English, Old Irish, all comes from the Germanic language lines. So it's the fatherland and the motherland, New Zealand and Australia, where they scooped up all the thousands of Protestants and shipped them out to New Zealand and Australia. They also scooped up thousands of Catholics as well. I think the thinking was if they took them far, far away, that they would redeem themselves and stop all this kind of nonsense that they had. So I'm going to sing you this song. It's called The Declaration of Abroth. And then, and when I come back next time, I'll be talking about the Jacobites and how they got the Jacobites out. You can go and research this. I'll put it up on the YouTube. It's best not to go into the Kings too much. You'll be there for a month of Sundays. So, so just be careful about that, right? So this is called the Declaration of Abroth, and this was created by a man called Alastair MacDonald. Now, the MacDonalds have got a huge history, and we have a huge MacDonald line over in New Zealand. And so that MacDonald line is going to be incredibly important for you to be knowing about, because the MacDonald line bred all through the New Zealand Maori population in the South Island. And not only that, the Protestant Germanic Protestants came on several ships from Germany and from, actually they came directly from Germany, actually, and as refugees from Germany to counteract the Catholic and the Jewish influence that had completely taken over the country and taken over all of the lands in the country. So they brought in several Protestant ships to counteract and to fight against them. So the same war that went on in Germany with Martin Luther and with the Jewish religion and the Catholic religion, that same war spilled over, and that 30-year war spilled over as refugees into England, Scotland, and Ireland. And then those same two groups, the first group were the religious groups that turned up in New Zealand, turned up in Australia, turned up in all the Pacific Islands, turned up in America, turned up in Canada to take over those countries. That group went first around about the 12 and 1300s. And then the way that the British and the Scottish and the Irish and the Germans counteracted that was they scooped up thousands of Protestants, put them on ships and sent them to those countries to fight, to stop these religions from taking over again and keep our parliaments. So that's what all this is about. So we'll go to the Declaration of Abroth. I'm going to sing you a song. It's by Alastair MacDonald. It's called The Declaration of Abroth. This was the fight where Scotland, the Jacobite king and the Catholic Church were trying to overwhelm all the Protestant people that had spilled out from the 30 Years' War from over in Europe, okay? So this was the first activity that occurred there. So let's try and understand all this, what's going on in our lives. Okay, I'm going to share the whole screen, and I'm going to hope that this comes up nicely. It's going to be a great song, but I'm going to sing it for you. Kate Floss is also a singer. Remembering that the song is by Alastair MacDonald, and it's called The Declaration of Abroth. Now, I'm a Protestant, so I'm not a Catholic. I'm not against the Catholics. What doesn't matter if you're a Catholic. Doesn't matter if you're a Protestant. Doesn't matter if you're a Jew. What I'm trying to tell you is that we're all caught up in this war, and I call it they're having this huge battle in the heavenly realm. And all they do, just like they scooped us all up and put us on ships, all they do is maneuver us around as pawns in their fight for lands and their fight for power. And they're just maneuvering us around. And what we've got to do is go to the law of Almighty God like we've always done. And that's how we're going to fight all of them. Because that's what Jesus said. Jesus come back and he said, you know what? None of you are going to rule. The religions aren't going to rule. The kings aren't going to rule. Even the parliament isn't going to rule. All can be removed by the other. The king can remove the people through parliament, can remove the king can remove parliament, the parliament can remove judges, and Supreme Court judges can remove parliament, and it's all done through us, because we have a direct line to God through the 1688 Bill of Rights. It's not actually called the Bill of Rights, it's called the 1688 will. It's the will of Jesus. So I'll get this reading for you. In 1320, Scotland said, should England dare our soil to tread, the blood will flow in rivers red. Before capitulation, no more will Scotland bow the knee to foreign prince whoever he be, for come what may, will they be free from English domination. Here's to the men who took the oath, the Declaration of Abroth. Freedom and right, our cause is bold to save us from damnation. Out with traitor and with foe, give the Saxon blow for blow, and freedom's brightest star shall glow above this Scottish nation. It's not for honour that we sign, or glory makes us long to die, but liberty is Scotland's cry, no English subjugation. Our fathers didn't die in vain, for while 100 men remain, no English king shall o'er us reign. Stand up for Scotland's nation. Here's to the men who took the oath, the Declaration of Abroth. Freedom and right, our cause is bold to save us from damnation. Out with traitor and with foe, give the Saxon blow for blow, and freedom's brightest star shall glow above the Scottish nation. Too long we've played the tartan fool, too long we've bowed to English rule, too long we've cringed before John Bull, afraid of confrontation. So heed the words from Bruce's pen, Scotland must be free again. Stand up 100 Scottish men who'll honour the Declaration. Here's to the men who took the oath, the Declaration of Abroth. Freedom and right, our cause is bold to save us from damnation. Out with traitor and with foe, give the Saxon blow for blow, and freedom's brightest star shall glow above the Scottish nation. Out with traitor and with foe, give the Saxon blow for blow, and freedom's brightest star shall glow above the Scottish nation. So that one there is a very important video that's talking about the stop sharing. So it's talking about the Declaration of Abroth, and what it does say in there, very important thing, it says that out with traitor, out with foe, give the Saxon blow for blow. So when he's talking about Saxon, he's talking about the Anglo-Saxons that had their German Anglo-Saxon laws, which they had come from the Germanic tribes, which were originally followed the laws of God, and they were not under any religions. In a time when there was no religions, in a time when there was no, the people just decided amongst, there were no kings, the people decided amongst themselves who were going to govern, and they all lived together, although the Germanic tribes were all consistently fighting. Now, let's just be fair here. The problem was that the German tribes were fighting amongst themselves for the lands as well, and they couldn't stop fighting. The same thing was occurring in Scotland, where the Scottish tribes couldn't stop fighting amongst themselves over who was going to rule. The same thing was occurring in Ireland, where they couldn't stop fighting amongst themselves over who was going to rule. The same thing occurred in New Zealand with the New Zealand Maori tribes who couldn't stop fighting, and even to this day, none of these tribes in any of these countries can stop fighting over who's going to rule. They all think that they've got more rights, that they've got better laws, and they want, not only do they want everybody, not only do they want their own tribe to follow those laws, they want everybody else to follow those laws as well. So that's why they came up with the 1688 will and marry, because under the 1688 will and marry, what they said is that the only right, the only rule that is the best rule that everybody can be governed by is God's, Almighty God's rule, which is no cruel and unusual punishments, because that's not in nature. All those devices that they were using for those cruel punishments weren't godly made. They were all man-made. Boiling people in pots, that was man-made. Cutting people's heads off with swords, that was man-made. Cutting people's tongues out so they couldn't speak, that was man-made. So that's one of the things that God said that you're not allowed to have. He said that everybody will be allowed to speak. Why are everybody allowed to speak? If you go and look in the jungle, you can't stop yourself from speaking. You're going to speak, you're doomed. And that's what they say in law. You can't make a law that people can't follow, because they're doomed to break it. They're doomed to break it if it's impossible for them to follow. And it is impossible, literally impossible, for a person to stop speaking what's in their heart, what's in their mind. They cannot do it. And so they will speak, and so therefore they would be punished and killed with this man-made. So all of those, so they said that there are many others in there. One of the laws that are under God's law is that no foreigners will be allowed to govern over us, and no religions. Religions are man-made. They're a conduit to teach people about God, but there are many, many facets to religion. There are business facets. There are governorship facets. There are many, many things. So what they came up with in 1688, that only God's right would be the right that all of us would have, because that's what we had in the beginning of time. So all of that spilled over, and all of those tribes were fighting. And to be fair to the Catholics, the Roman Catholics, they had already set up a system of governance. And what they said, if you all stop fighting, if the Roman Empire was built, they said, if you all stop fighting, and if we can get you to all to stop fighting, then we can build cities, we can build things, you can be educated, you can have all these things, if only we can get you to stop fighting. So they went into those countries to order them to stop fighting, but what they ended up doing was stealing all their lands. It was just ended up being nothing more than a huge, huge land grab. And that's still what's going on today. Keep watching the videos. Next video is going to be the Jacobites by name, and how they got the Jacobites and the Jacobite kings, which is the King Bruce. They got him out. They got all of those out. So now there was a Jacobite rising. So the next video is going to be about the Jacobite rising. Don't forget to check in for that. Kate Floss, citizen historian, trying to get all of the Anglo-Saxon countries to come together to realise that we are currently being ruled by foreign entities. England's being ruled by an Indonesian Hindu. New Zealand is being ruled by the Latter-day Saints religion. They're building temples all over our country. They've taken over all of the islands. Australia, I'm not sure, but they're pretty much, their parliament, they recently had people swear the oath of allegiance in parliament on a pink Quran. On a pink Quran, they've allowed the Quran to be sworn in as part of the oath of allegiance using the Quran or using Hindu text to swear in the oath of allegiance. Now, all of this goes against our 1688 Will and Mary, which says that no foreigners will, or their religions or their religious organisations will ever be allowed to govern over us. And there they are, sat in our parliaments of England, sat in our parliaments of Australia and New Zealand and Canada. We've all got to stand together. So let's get it together like we did all those thousands of years ago. We did it once and we can do it again. Stand together. See you later. Kate Floss signing out. I won't finish this.